until afterward. All right, actually recording this time. This class has got a lot of information. So for the first half, we discuss Psychological Safety for Teams, the book by Timothy Clark. Then we spend the next half of this going through seeing systems. And so basically applied systems theory. And we'll be using the book by Oshry. And so we have a lot to cover it, but these two topics blend together so nicely because seriously, if you're doing psychological safety for teams, you are in a place to be able to see systems. If you're seeing systems and actually using the information you gain, then you should be applying psychological safety for teams because they really just interrelate nicely. So it's a really well thought through course. I cannot take credit for designing it. This was not one of the courses I designed, but I like it. I've been teaching it now for a year and a half. And it's one of my favorite courses to teach. So what we're going to do is pull this up. Not yet, Brian. Come on. Get with the program. Share and share alike. Let's see where to share this. All right. So you're going to have a lot of information that you already heard, but we're just going to go over it one time right now. We'll have another, at least one or two more review days, but it's good because it helps to just solidify that into your mind. All right. Also, we get to go over the main, really important, uber important points again. So that is always good. So leadership and management. Chosen the right class. Leadership and management. In week one, we looked at what a leader is and how leadership differs from management. Now, leadership is not about control. It's not about power. That is, of course, in your textbook by Clark. Management is positional, whereas leadership is a choice. It is a lifestyle. Somebody who is not in management can be a leader if that person encourages others, brings others into the, includes them within the group, seeks to avoid keeping anybody on the outside. So you find leaders in some of the strangest places. And sometimes they're not even in positions of quote unquote what people think of as leadership. You could be a janitor and actually be a leader. You can be a framer and be a leader. Leadership is truly a lifestyle. It is a human-centric way of approaching social groups, tasks, projects, and the like. Leadership is about working with others to accomplish the mission. A manager oftentimes lords things over you and says, your due date is X, Y, and Z. You need to get project A, B, and C's done and filed by such and such a date. And then they don't lift a finger to really help you. A leader is right there in the fray with you, even if they are also a manager. Now, granted, half the time they may be in other meetings and stuff like that, but they're fighting for resources for you. They're getting feedback from you. They accept feedback from you. Leadership styles. We discussed how Llewellyn, why do I say Llewellyn every single time? Lewin talked about 3 basic leadership styles. I got this from Kanika and Fugate, 2015. It's a wonderful textbook. It's probably about 300 pages long. Be happy that's not your textbook. But it was mine in grad school. One of my many times in grad school. He talked about autocratic, democratic, and laissez-faire. Autocratic is very much right there. It's kind of a synonym with authoritarian leadership and dictatorial leadership. They all kind of relate together. One might bring out a slightly different aspect than another, but they're all that commanding, commandeering, almost militaristic type of leadership. There is a time and a place for autocratic and authoritarian and even dictatorial leadership. In one case would be on a military recon team, like I used to lead. There was a time and a place where when I said something, it had to go regardless of if anybody else liked it or not on my team, because I was a sergeant. But I also applied servant leadership, which we'll talk about in a minute, but that's when we were in garrison or we were planning things. We're back at the TOC, Tactical Operations Center, and we were coming up with the mission. I would get everyone's input and feedback, including the lowest private on the team. Doesn't mean I used their ideas. Sometimes I did if they were good. But just the fact that even the lowest person on the team could give input made them feel like they owned what we were working on. So it increased ownership. And then laissez-faire, you see that usually successfully used when you're leading engineers or anybody who's very creative. And that is a more hands-off approach. Basically, you tell them this is the project, these are the specifications, and this is the date they want it by. And you turn and walk away. You kind of let them self-govern, okay? It's a little bit different than just a standard self-governance team, but there is a place for laissez-faire. However, if you try to use laissez-faire leadership on a military team, not going to work. If you try to use it with law enforcement, it's not going to work. If you try to use it in most scenarios, it's not going to work. It's going to bite you in the backside real fast because people will abuse that liberty, that autonomy. While we do discuss with psychological safety for teams that people are given autonomy, there's certain amounts of autonomy you don't want to give most teams. But your engineers and your creative types, they need that autonomy in order to innovate, in order to think ahead, to solve the problems they're working on. So over the years, since Lewin did his research, some other leadership styles have been added. And this is not an inclusive list, because we'd be here forever just talking about leadership styles. But this gives you a little bit of a snapshot. You have transactional leadership, and that really does depend a bit on McGregor's theory X and theory Y. Are you familiar with McGregor's theory X and theory Y? All right, well, McGregor's theory X, theory Y was this. Theory X is that employees cannot be trusted. You cannot trust them to make decisions. You cannot trust them to complete the projects. You cannot trust them at all. Therefore, you must watch over them 100% of the time, and you must micromanage. Theory Y is the exact opposite. People can be trusted. They can be trusted to turn things in on time, to do the projects as they're assigned. And therefore, you treat them humanely. And so McGregor wasn't promoting theory X. He was saying, this is what you find. You find these two dichotomies. Okay. So transactional leadership is that kind of dichotomy, except only on the bad side. Because the one who benefits in a transactional leadership scenario is the leader. The transaction is this: you do the work, and I will reward you with you still get to have a job, or you just get a paycheck. Any additional rewards come to me, the manager, such as in bonuses, compensation packages like that. So transactional leadership isn't all bad, but it usually gets blown out of, we'll say, proportion, and the person abuses that power that they get in the transactional leadership style. And the one with the leader, with the power, is the leader. There definitely is a power differential there. Now, transformational leadership, this is more socially minded. You're looking to transform your team to be able to either progress ahead in their careers, which means you may be allowing them time to go to college. You might work your schedule out so that they still put in their 40 hours a week, but they've got the hours they need to go to classes in the evenings or something like that. Or you're training somebody up to actually take your position. That sounds dangerous. But if you're training someone up to take your position, you're probably training to take someone else's position in that sort of an organization. That's what we did in the military. I was an E5 sergeant. I was training to become an E6 staff sergeant, but I was training at my E4 specialists and corporals to become sergeants themselves. So you train one ahead of where you are, you work where you're at, but you train people behind you to move into your slot. And so it creates a seamless transition of leaders. So transformational leadership is really one of the more positive ones, especially when combined with servant leadership, which is really developed by Robert Greenleaf in the 1980s. Once again, that's not serving like the leader of the team is taking your orders for lunch and bringing you coffee during your breaks. That's not the type of servant we're talking about, but rather trying to lift people up, encourage people, get feedback from their team, and then not only just receive that feedback, but literally listen to it. Because there's a difference between hearing something, which is a physical process, and listening, which is a physical and processing your nervous system, where you actually process the information, think about it in your mind, and determine what is being said. So servant leadership combines well with most other forms of leadership. I used an authoritarian approach to leadership as a sergeant, but I combined into it servant leadership. And that allowed for my team to feel like I wasn't lording my positional power over them. Now, granted, there were plenty of times where I had to make them do push-ups and I had to write them up and I had to do all that stuff because sometimes people do some pretty they do things without thinking, especially when they're privates, because they're so young in the world. So leadership and systems thinking. Clark 2020 pointed out that leaders should work to increase the intellectual friction while reducing social friction. In other words, get the brains turning, get the thoughts going, get that creativity stirred up so it leads into innovation. But you want to reduce the tension between people. So you don't want intra-peer fighting. You don't want your team, half of your team in one clique, the other half in another, and one last person off on their own, just being ignored by everybody. Systems think, let me try English. The system thinker's approach to leadership. You identify the elements in the system. The elements are also called nodes. Those are people, policies, processes, anything you can look at using an analytical approach, which is a microscopic view. Then once you get that, you step back to use synthesis instead of analysis to understand the interconnections between all these various different elements. How are they communicating? How do they impact or affect one another? What are the long-term effects of this policy on this group of people? That sort of thing. So this is actually useful from organizations at the Fortune 500 global level, all the way down to relationships, friendships, acquaintanceships, etc. Because humans are human, and we're going to do human things. We relate with others in a particular way. We interact with others in a particular way. We think in certain ways, and they are highly predictable. Okay, you come up and you slap me across the face, you can probably predict the reaction, just like if I did the same to you. So we have very predictable mannerisms. And you can predict what someone's going to do based on what you would do in that situation, which is called empathy. So the 4 stages of psychological safety. You have inclusion safety, and this brings individuals from a state of exclusion. And remember, the one criteria is that they're human. Of course, we're not going into the whole discussion about you don't want a janitor to be a doctor. We've already had that conversation. That's common sense. But you get a group of doctors together and all applying for a position or to be on a residency team. The one criteria after they're a doctor and they got their specialization is that they're human. There's no additional criteria for inclusion safety. Now, learner safety allows people to learn without fear and rejection, because fear and rejection will destroy anything that team is working on, and it will destroy each individual that experiences that. In contributor safety, leaders grant encouragement and support, and that permits the individuals on the team to bring new ideas, to contribute new solutions, new policies. Autonomy is given and performance is returned. In challenger safety, this is where the purest form of innovation will occur. And ideas are challenged. You see, you can bring new ideas to me, and the guy next to you or the girl next to you, the woman next to you can challenge your idea. In academia, when I was working on my doctoral dissertation, I had to get feedback on a regular basis from my committee. Basically, that meant that they handed me my rear end on a silver platter a couple times a month. I once passed a stage, performance style. They said, you passed. But I had 350 plus corrections I had to make. You see, feedback means that we have to hear it, and then we have something that we have to do. It requires some sort of not altercation, but some change to the process. Now, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Oh, let me back up. This is where no. Okay, we talked about the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We talked about that. That was that pyramid, that triangle. We had the physical needs at the bottom, and we ended at the very top with self-actualization. Organizations are able to help with all of those to a degree, except for self-actualization, because it's right in the name, self-actualization. The team, the employees, the team members, they need to do the actualization process for themselves. Now let's back this up. Let's say we constitute a team, okay? Each of you has got to go through that self-actualization stage. Does the team also have the ability to self-actualize? Yes. Because that team, much like an organization, is a form of an entity. Just like an organization legally is an entity, a team develops its own personality, its own traits, its own characteristics. So it too can begin to realize who it really is as a team. So respect and permission, they're discussed throughout all these stages, but in looking at inclusion stage and learner stage, the acceptance of each team member is essential at this stage. That is part of that respect. You include everybody, you accept each person as they are, and you give that freedom to be able to learn, to make mistakes without fear or rejection. We talked quickly about constructive dissent. Let's say Vios, right? My Vios. I come to you and I say, we're all a team. And I say, Vios, I want you for the next quarter, for the next 3 months, you are going to look for things to constructively dissent against. I want you to go through our procedures, our policies, our products, our machines. I want you to go through everything that we do and find things that you can bring me feedback on what we should change and why we should change it. That's constructive dissent. You want that. You want that bad as a leader. Destructive dissent is where, Vios, you off on your own decide to become the dissenter, but instead of bringing positive things, you bring negative. You're like, well, this person did this, this, and this. You're tattletaling. You're complaining about this person. You're complaining about that. You're always in the negative. That's bad. That will destroy a team. And of course, that form of dissent, it's a disruptive behavior. And any disruptive behavior is a result of some form of rejection. Remember that rejection is emotionally traumatic for individuals and emotionally traumatic for the team. We talked about inclusion safety, and we used that clip from MASH, Mobile Army Surgical Hospitals, what that stands for. Back in the Korean War, Vietnam War, and I want to say the first Gulf War, the U.S. Army used MASH stations. They were companies of medics and doctors and nurses that would provide medical aid close to the front lines. They now have been changed to, I think, what they call them, a brigade medical aid station or something like that. And they kept some of that process, but they changed because things do change over time. But we looked at how the characters interacted with each other in that clip, how one person was disrupting the flow of the unit. And we were using, and we'll turn back to that episode and maybe another one, because there's wonderful depictions of the interpersonal communication and interaction, but looking at it at the analysis point, from looking at the elements, and then backing up to look at all the interconnectivity that goes on and how this group is impacted by this group because of this. That's all systems analysis. When I think I showed a graph last week, do I have it on here? Let me see if I can find this real quick. Where'd you go? this, and now let me jump over to Zoom and share this. Zoom. Stop the screen share. Start the screen share. This is one type of systems analysis graph. Yep, I know. Would you just let me do this, please? Thank you. In here, you have the individuals. Each of them is some form of geometric shape. And then you have the connections and the loops. And you got the different problems, the causative effects that occurred. And as a person who studies systems, you have to map this out. Is it a bidirectional process or a monodirectional process? This is bidirectionally on the gray side. And this dotted light gray line or brownish line, it only has an arrow at one end because it is monodirectional. So we got to see what happens from here that impacts this over here. This particular episode of MASH dealt with racism. And so in breaking it down, I was able to determine who did what, where, why, and when, and who all impacted. You'll be able to do something very similar to that by the end of this course by using the iceberg diagram, a causal loop diagram, and a modified Venn diagram. Now, let me go back to here, share this again, stop that share. Do not make it easy. There we go. Okay, now DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, fits into our talking about inclusion safety. What makes people feel included? Well, one, they're brought in from a state of exclusion, but they don't feel rejected based on their religion, their ethnicity, race, their any aspect of themselves, their gender. Nothing about them causes them to feel rejected by the group. Therefore, DEI is important to take into consideration when you're looking at inclusion safety. Organizational stories, every organization has those. If these stories make one group of people feel superior to another group of individuals in that organization, then there is a huge problem. I pointed out that there were numerous organizations that existed in the early part to the mid part of the 20th century that were very racist. And those organizations, a lot of them are still around. But if you look at their organizational stories, they had a change of direction between probably the late 1980s through to today. They corrected their racist activities and their racist policies. Now, an organization that hides the negative stories is not clearly thinking. You should never hide the skeletons in the closet as an organization because we live in an information age and people can Google and find out so much about your organization. It is better for you just to admit what your organization did wrong and then show how you corrected those problems and how you stayed on this path of correction from that point onward. Instead, what some organizations do is they erase anything they can from their organizational background that would make them look bad. Well, they're hiding something. If they're hiding that, what else are they hiding? So if it's your organization, make sure you own up to the good, the bad, and the ugly. And you show how you're making things better for everybody. We talked about how social identity theory came into this picture and how personal identity is developed through the social systems we are a part of. Talked about leader-member exchange theory, LXM. This was brought up in an article by Digonoli et al. The leader-membership relationship impacts the organization's overall success. There must be a very effective and robust feedback system, which the authors called a 360-degree feedback system. The leader-member exchanges, they need to be positive and they need to be high quality, meaning that if you only are interacting the leaders to the members at a surface level, none of the problems are being A, addressed, B, owned up to, or C, you're just trying to hide them. And I can't stress enough how bad that is for an organization to try to hide the negative parts of their history. As a matter of fact, the organizations that did have a negative past in like the 1950s, but then changed and sought to really change and to include everybody and to end their vile ways of racism and et cetera and sexism and all that. They actually, I have a lot of respect for them because they had a problem and they fought against the tide of all the other organizations trying to maintain that old way of doing things, and they strove for something better, for equality for people, regardless of where they come from or what they believe. Now, transactional transformational leadership, we would bring it up again here, because Viganelli et al. Did bring it up, and they present it with positive results. They found that smaller teams have higher success rates. And that kind of stands to reason. If you've got a team with 100 people on it, it's going to be a lot more difficult to develop those small interpersonal communication events, the relationships that develop. You're going to have factions and cliques, which will set that team up for failure. But a smaller team, you have less room to hide cliques, small groups of people that adhere to one ideology or they surround one person, and then they begin to follow that person, and that's how hostile takeovers happen. Start with a small clique. The researchers found that leaders who think they are transformational leaders, their teams don't see the same thing. And so if you're a leader and you think, well, I'm a transformational leader, I'm trying to bring people into a better place in their career, their life, whatever, ask your team. Ask them if they feel that. Because if they don't feel it, then it doesn't matter what you think is happening. What matters is what the team is feeling, because they're the ones that you're supposed to be trying to encourage and lift up. If they don't feel encouraged, if they don't feel supported by you or lifted up by you, then you're not being effective. Sense making, that's how we perceive the system we are a part of. And sense making goes back to that organizational storytelling. That's a part of it. So is knowledge sharing. Anything dealing with information about that system that helps you make sense of it better, that's sense making. So here at Cleary, there are things that involve sense making. The Cleary mind is one. Two, there's a team spirit here at Cleary, esprit de corps. Now, granted, most colleges have that, but we're talking about here at the moment. These are things that point to sense making. Do they help you make sense of the organization in light of the circumstances it is in? Clark pointed out that organizational stories can exclude people based on race. I bring that up again because it has happened too many times in the last couple hundred years. And if we think that's where it started, we're wrong, because racism is it's one of those things that has been a bane of human existence for as long as humans have been humaning around. We like to feel that we're a part of something greater than ourselves, but we also do not like to be wrong. So we want to think that the group we are following or the group we are a part of is the best group, the most correct group. Unfortunately, we see that breeds tribalism, which from there comes racism. We also have sexism comes out of there, abilityism. If a person is disabled and the group pushes them away and excludes them based on their disabilities, they are being, well, they're just proving the fact that the tribally against people who have disabilities. And ironically, at some point in time, we all will have a disability, whether it's permanent or temporary. So we should have empathy. There's some videos this week, and we're going to use this as the middle point in your curriculum. A video with Helen Sanderson, and she discussed 3 new areas for business leadership to think about. One, bring in your whole self to work. So when you watch that, think about, what does it mean for me to bring my whole self to work? Is it me physically, me emotionally? Is it all my extra organizational relationships? Yes, to all of those. When you come into work, your body is there, your mind is there. So physical, mental. But then a part of that is all the if you got children, if you have a spouse, if you got significant others, if you've got family over at your place, whatever it is, you always have that on your mind. And so that's part of you that comes to work. Backing up a little bit here, let's say your pipes in your house have bust in the bathroom and there's a flood going on the 2nd floor of your house, but you have to go to work. I bet all day long you're going to be worried about what's happening at your house, about that flood. Or worse yet, if your child is sick and in the hospital, you carry that with you all day long. As a leader, sometimes we got people that do not normally behave poorly, but suddenly they're behaving badly. We shouldn't just immediately write them up. We should ask them into a private conversation, to an office or something. Say, listen, are you okay? This is off the record. Is everything okay with you? Do you need to talk about something? Do you have extra pressure weighing on your shoulders at the moment? Maybe they'll share with you, maybe not. But the point is empathy. Empathy to feel that another person is going through life, its ups and its downs, and they bring that with them to work, just like every leader does the same thing. Okay, a focus on purpose. She talks about that. And self-management. I really want to talk about self-management. Self-managing teams is this new idea that I'm not totally convinced that I think it's a good idea. It would be as though we are a team, but we do not have a leader. My question is when that team needs resources, who's the point of contact to go between the team members and the organization to get the resources necessary? Normally, that would be the leader. Who takes care of disciplinary problems? Normally, that would be the leader. Can we trust our team members to not abuse that power just because they got mad at us one day? Now, you could say, but a leader could abuse that power. Of course, and they often do. But in an organization, there is a recourse. You can go to HR and you can file a complaint. You can go to your supervisor's boss and talk to them. So there's always a way to put that leader back into following the rules properly. But what if it's just your team? Anybody in your team could write anybody else up. See, there's a lot of things I'm not convinced about self-management yet. I don't like the idea, but I'm not totally against it in the sense of I want to see more data before I really come to my own conclusions about it. I know. What do you think? Do you think a team without a leader, a leaderless team, would be a viable approach to management? I got a couple no's. Anybody think that it would be at all? No? Okay, so we're a team, but we don't have a leader. We have no leader. We're leaderless, but we are leading ourselves. Do you see that as being positive or negative? Positive? How would it be positive?
We can all work together.
Ideally, yes. But how many times have you found that actually happens? Where you're with a team, whether it's sports or a social group, and everybody actually is on the same sheet of music? Isn't somebody usually like, whoa, wait, shouldn't we do this instead?
Yeah, but then someone's usually like, coach.
Right, the coach is a leader. Let's take the coach out. What if the team coached itself? Who would determine? No, right.
Me?
Yeah,
I'm pretty sure like there has to be this, even if it's just one or like multiple leaders in a group. Especially to get structure in. And that's the point later on. If you don't have a leader, you can lose that structure, that system, and then things start just falling apart.
absolutely. I totally agree with you. I do see what you're saying though. In an ideal situation, a group of people should be able to govern themselves effectively. However, a couple thousand years of written human history, about 10,000 years of written recorded human history, we haven't been able to do that very often. And one of the biggest problems we have is a little three-letter word, ego. I know best. I know better than you. I don't. But I like to think I do. That's that part of our psychological system, our makeup in our brain that says that I am important, that I have got the rights, that I'm doing the right things. And if I think this is the right thing, then it must be right because I'm thinking it. But it's so full of faults. Because I know myself, I very, very often don't know the right thing to do. So I seek counsel, I seek feedback, I talk to people. I think ideally, in a perfect world, the gravity wouldn't take me down. But in a perfect world, I think we would be able to be like that. I just don't know if humanity is close enough to that point yet.
I don't think it will be ever possible.
Ever possible?
Yeah.
Well, as long as humans are at least human like we are now and like we've been for 10,000 years, I don't see it as a possibility either.
Because in any case, we are basically animals. And we need to follow somebody.
Right.
As a leader.
I totally agree with you. I'm in agreement. That's why I don't buy into this, but it's a good point to discuss in the classroom. You see, here we're working on ideas. This is college. This is where ideas get thrown around. We get to talk about them. I would never have an organization and have leaderless teams. I think that would doom that organization to failure in a very short period of time. On the same token, if I were to have an organization and I put an authoritarian, dictatorial sort of leader in the position, I would expect that organization to have an equal amount of problems in almost as short a period of time. I think there's a balance between things.
What if you got a figure?
Okay, what if you got to pick your team?
And like there wasn't a leader, but like, because you said that a group of people without a leader would fail. But what if I got to handpick, we'll say 5 people who don't have a leader, you told us to do a task, but we wouldn't done it.
Okay, would that be an anomaly or would that be the norm? Is that the exception or the norm? I think most of the time that I've been part of any organization, you take a group of people, you set them towards a task without a leader running that event, that project. You'll have, if you have 5 people, you have people going in 3 different directions because 3 people will start taking control. 2 people will be sitting there quiet or just following. There will be division, there'll be strife, and there'll be infighting. Because who do I follow is not determined. So what happens is we start fighting for it. Now, it may not be with this or nothing, but we're arguing and we're vying for position. So what I do is I then go talk to everyone else here, half the other team, the rest of the team, and I say, you know what, these guys, they don't know what they're doing, do they? No. You know what we ought to do? We ought to select one of us to take charge, at least of our part of it, and tell them where to go get out of here. Then what happens is we start that internal politic, that political nature of humanity, where now I might be saying, yeah, we should pick one of us. But what I'm doing is I'm manipulating the situation so I get to be in control. How do I know this happens? I've done it before. And if you're honest about it, we all have done something similar to that at some point in time. But yeah, if we got to pick our team and they were people we'd spent years growing up with and we knew implicitly, it could work. Maybe. until the first problem arose. Problem with resources, with finances, with the amount of hours worked. If you're working a 40-hour week and you're working a 30-hour week, but she's got as much say as you do, you could begin to resent her. Or if you base the income off of what you produce and you're producing more than anyone else, so you make more than anyone else, now other people begin to resent you because of what you're earning more. What do you think the problem between communism and capitalism is? It comes down to who does the work and who's got the money and who gets the money. So yeah, this is a great conversation, by the way. It's a good thought experiment. Would it matter what kind of team? Like if we had an executive strategic leadership C-suite, CEO, COO, CPO, CFO, all the different people in the C-suite, could they run a leaderless team?
No.
I think they could even manage it less.
Yeah.
Because they're used to having control. And when you're used to control, try giving it up. It's a hard thing to do. I do think, though, that there is a benefit if that executive suite comes in and says, you know what, we're going to shift who the senior person is here every quarter because we need to bring fresh ideas in. We need to somehow stimulate innovation. I think there's a benefit there. There's also a series of problems that could happen with that, too. Once again, internal politics, power dynamics, they come into play. Pitting people against each other, going back to I'm talking to them saying, no, these guys in the front row, you got to watch out for that BIOS. That BIOS, he's going to be out to get you, even if you're not. I could be lying out my teeth. If they believe it, they buy in, now we all turn against you. So maybe having an ethical form of leadership that allows for each person to give feedback, for each person to challenge the status quo, to be psychologically safe, might be the answer. Am I running out of time?
No.
I might be. Sometimes I get talking and I forget what time it is. So. No, I do the same thing. And half the time, what the way the rest of this day is going, I got to keep track. So this is actually, I wasn't planning on this whole discussion. I'm glad we had it. And I encourage you guys to give your input. I like that. And y'all online, if anyone's got anything to say regarding this, sorry, for a minute, I got so in this conversation, I literally forgot we had people online. If anybody wants to contribute to their thoughts about these leaderless teams, anybody online have any thoughts? And in the future, if you have something to say and I'm not responding to your raised hand or whatever, just like last week, blurt it out. I don't mind stopping for you. All right. I guess we'll move on a little. We just got right here in the classroom. We got that discussion was unexpected, unplanned. It was good though. So Sanderson continued. Okay. She mentioned that accountability is essential for self-managing teams. No, I think accountability is essential for any team. And if you don't have a designated leader, who's the accountable person for that team? We could say the entire team is accountable, but in reality, somebody's going to emerge as being the spokesperson, which is a de facto leader. She further pointed out that psychological safety was more important than, can't read, leadership. I'm going to disagree with that statement, and this is academia. We get to do that. Just like you all get to disagree with me, I get to disagree with this lady. I think Sanderson is mistaken here because I think in order for psychological safety to be fully effective within an organization, and for an organization to truly be an organization, there needs to be some form of leadership. And I don't think that the leadership is more important than psychological safety, but a leader who focuses on psychological safety is more important. Does that make sense? And once again, anybody online on Zoom, please just jump right on into this conversation. I promise I will not fire you. So in week 2, we talked about learner safety. Clark noted that humans have an innate need to learn and grow. Having no one care about your failure is the definition of devastation, according to Clark. He also pointed out that we often fail in the eyes of our coworkers before we even notice it ourselves. With these things taken into consideration, a leaderless team would be very detrimental, because if my coworkers see my failure before even I see it, but there's no leader to moderate and temper things down, then it could get out of hand and I get run out of town, so to say. So rejection, humiliation, or punishment, these are all forms of abuse if they're used. If they do anything, let me back this up, anything that goes against that psychological safety, which includes rejection, humiliation, and punishment, they are forms of abuse. Now, if you have performance issues along the lines of not just performance, but behavioral issues, there is a form of punishment that is not the same kind of punishment. We're talking, this is an intra-group punishment. So from one peer to another, there's some form of punishment, or from the leader to the peers, without some form of specified disciplinary action system. Punishment can be taken to an extreme. Like here in school, if you plagiarize, I can turn you in for plagiarizing. What I usually do is I'll talk to you. I'll give you feedback. If you do it again, we'll actually have a conversation about it. I'll try to make sure that you're properly educated on what plagiarization is, what plagiarizing means, what it looks like. And then if you continue in a concerted effort to maintain your plagiaristic ways, I have no choice but to turn you in. So within a team, there needs to be some sort of disciplinary system set up for bad behavior. If Vios, I'm picking on you a lot today, sorry. If Vios comes in here and he just starts punching each of us in right in the nose, I don't think he ever would do that. But let's say he did. There would have to be something in place that he knew before he even did it. This could happen to me. It's like we drive our car down the road. We know that if we intentionally run over a bicyclist, we've committed murder. If we unintentionally do it, it's manslaughter. The moral of the story is, don't run over a bicyclist. So we're careful when we drive. Same thing in an organization. We learn to be careful so we don't cause harm to another person, because harm within that team, leg cramp, harm within that team, it creates a lasting effect. If you've ever been part of a team and you feel like your coworkers ganged up on you unfairly or even fairly, and they were unforgiving, they were not understanding, likelihood is you're not going to want to work with teams that remind you of that negative experience. And that creates a psychological issue of avoidance. Now you're avoiding anything that could remotely remind you of it. And that's not good either. So I think we go back to the whole thing. I think leaders are necessary. So an unsafe workplace is a refuge of ridicule. I use the example of when I was in the Army. My team, I tried to make it safe. The other team ran like you would normally think an Army team working. Ridicule, making fun of each other, cursing all the time, abusive behavior patterns, narcissism. Well, their success rate was pretty almost non-existent. And we're not talking in the office, we're talking out in the field. They couldn't work as a team because no one trusted each other. You've got to trust the people that you lead, and they need to trust you, and they need to trust each other. There are responsibilities and learner. Okay, I remember what I wrote. Responsibilities and learner safety. The responsibilities within learner safety. Leaders need to create a learner environment, not a learning environment, but a learner environment. A learning environment is an environment that is set up for people to be able to learn. A learner environment is an environment set up for the individual who is learning. So one is human-centric, the other is process-centric. Are you focusing on the process of learning or on the people feeling safe to learn? We want the people to feel safe to learn. Learning as an act is the learner's responsibility. But the leaders need to be active in promoting the right kind of safe atmosphere so their team feels comfortable and safe enough to spend the resources to learn. What resources is there or are there? Our thoughts, are being studious, are giving feedback, input, asking questions. Asking a question can make somebody very uncomfortable if they do not feel they can trust those they are around. So the leader has to make this a safe environment to promote learner safety. So learner safety is contingent on inclusion safety having been built and maintained. You are not going to create learner safety in an environment that excludes people, because they're not going to feel safe. Because if you excluded these people for whatever reason, and you could turn on me and find a reason to exclude me now. But if I know that you've accepted these people into that team, into that social sphere, I don't fear that I'm going to be pushed out. So what about fear? Fear has got to be disconnected from the actual mistake that's made. You should be able to feel like if you make a mistake, it's part of the learning process and you're not going to be penalized for it. So the leader here has got a lot of power. If you make a mistake and I make you feel bad for making that mistake, I do not have an environment that has inclusion safety or learner safety. But if you make a mistake and I make you feel, okay, you made a mistake, let's find a way to do it better. It's okay. We all make mistakes. You know, you'll learn, you'll get this concept, and then I help you learn it. You're going to feel like it's an environment that is where learning actually can happen. And if you see somebody else making a mistake and they're not being caused to have fear or to feel rejection or humiliation, you then feel like you can actually accidentally make a mistake, because that's what a mistake is. Because you know it's safe. They didn't team up against her when she made the mistake. So if I make a mistake, they're not going to team up against me. And the more that your team sees that, the safer they're going to feel in the learning process. Now, failure is an amazing teacher. Failure is probably the best professor you'll ever have. As long as you use that moment of failure to stand back up and go at it again, to learn what you did wrong. When we grew up and we learned to ride a bicycle, if we made a mistake, the bike and us, we both fell down to the ground. That was an immediate consequence for a mistake. We were able to learn because that consequence happened so quick. We could link the consequence falling to the mistake. I got my shoelace stuck in the chain. Now I know, tuck my shoelaces in so I don't get it stuck in the chain and I won't fall. Unfortunately, life is not an immediate effect and then consequence sort of scenario. Oftentimes, the consequences may not be seen for days, months, or years. And the human brain does not make those connections that easily. We've been programmed into a world to think linear, linear, linear. Cause, effect, A, then B. In reality, it's all these different variables, a point of decision or action, and then all these possible outcomes. And the best we honestly can do is say, how many of these variables impacting me can I understand? And based on that information, what is the most likely outcomes that could happen? Because the world we live in is not a linear world. It's non-linear. It's chaotic. So leaders need to be patient. They need to be humble. They need to show humility. And you don't do that by acting like you know everything. Yes, I'm on this side of the professor desk nowadays. I spent a decade on the other side. I don't care what side of the desk I've been on. There's plenty I don't know. I may be on this side of the desk right now, but there's still a lot I do not know. That breeds humility. I'm not a know-it-all. I don't know everything. But rather I can learn from anything and anyone at any point in time if I let myself. Edmondson, in her article, she did point out that psychological safety is the responsibility of the organization as a whole. Granted, you may be in an organization that does not promote psychological safety, but you could be on a team that does. In that case, the organization failed you, but your team leader didn't. And if you find yourself on a team without any psychological safety, the good news is you can create it yourself. You can apply all these principles one step at a time, one stage at a time for those right around you, your coworkers, and you can make that a safe team. Granted, it's going to be a little more difficult if your leader is not involved. But remember, I told you the leader isn't always the manager. In that case, you would then be the leader. The manager would just be the manager. So emotion. Many professors, Clark pointed out, many professors use an authoritarian approach. But it is in the democratic and collaborative approaches where learning occurs. And so I try to make my students all understand, not only do I give feedback, I'm open to receive feedback. And one of the things about that is I may not like the feedback you're giving me, but I need to hear it. How else do I know how you're being impacted? How else can I become better? I need that. If I had a knife and I want to sharpen it, I've got to use a sharpening stone. And it grates against the blade every time I swipe across. Every time I do that, it takes off a little bit more metal and hones it down. Well, that's what's happening. When you receive feedback, you're being sharpened. You're being made into a useful tool. The human mind, in our human mind, emotion is nested inside of reason, and reason is nested inside of emotion. Now, normally I would say that's a logical fallacy, that is circular argumentation, but in this case it is not. Because the way our brains and our minds are, when we say nested, two aspects of our mind can actually encompass the other because of the way they're interconnected. There's almost like this matrix they're a part of. And at one point, depending on what the situation is, the emotion is the one that's covering. And in a different situation, a different set of circumstances, it is the reason that is covering. So it's case dependent. People process socially, emotionally, and intellectually at the same moment. We like to think that I process with logic. Well, you process with emotion. No, everybody processes with logic and with emotion at the same time. There is no getting rid of. Now, your reaction could be grounded more in logic than emotion, but the processing of that information happens at once. And if that's true for you, that's going to be true for every person that's on your team. Leaders need to refrain from overreacting when they receive dissent or bad news from their team. If two of you came up to me after class and said, "Thank you for what you're doing, but we really need for you to wear a hat because your bald head is so shiny, we cannot see anything else in the classroom right now." If I take that and I say, "Okay, no problem, I'll wear a hat. I've got one in the car. I'll go get it right now. No problem." That's a normal approach. That's a normal way to accept that. Now, this is an absurd example, but I'm doing that so we're not picking on anybody, even myself. But if instead, when you tell me this, I get offended and I start cursing and I yell and I scream and I get all mad, how is that productive? How am I receiving your input, your feedback? I'm not at that moment. So you have to learn as a leader, you take your own ego and you set it aside when people need to talk to you and present you with feedback, with their feeling. Because our ego wants to make it about us. Well, I have a right to a bald head. I have a right to not wear a hat. Okay, that may be true. But if I want to teach this class, if I want to lead this team effectively, I need for them to be able to focus on what they're doing and not be distracted by the glare coming off my head. So in that case, it would be sensible to just put on the hat. Now let's take this into a normal situation. You're on a team. You come up to your supervisor, you say, "Boss, I appreciate what you're doing, but you kind of seem to get upset at us for nothing all the time." Well, that's a valid point there. You shouldn't feel like your supervisor is going to blow up every time you talk to them. If they receive that and say, "Okay, well, thank you for pointing that out." Inside, they could be getting mad and angry, but they learn to put that aside and listen to you. It'll make you feel like you matter. But if instead they let the anger come out and they get defensive, you're not going to feel like you matter. I've been in relationships in the past. I've been married enough times I can say I've been in relationships. And I would get into an argument with my then spouse. And instead of listening to what she was saying, I was conjuring up my next attack, my defense, my assault, whatever, not physical assault, but in the argument. In with words, I was thinking what I was going to say next, defending myself or attacking her or whatever. That's not accepting somebody's feedback. That's not giving them the ability to give feedback. So let's do the same with our teams. Let's listen to them. Let's put our own emotion aside. And let's put someone else's as being more important than our own as a leader. I was calculating out the time. I think we got about 15 minutes left. Okay, I think we're going to go ahead and we're going to stop there for today. We're going to pick back up on Wednesday. I got it right. Wednesday, and finish this review and I go over a few things. Oh, let me see how much we have left anyway. Where are we at? This is 17. Yeah. Let's do that. We're going to stop here on slide 17 today. But on Thursday, I want us to try something new. And everybody online, all will be online. What we're going to do is I want each of you to think of examples where you have been on a team that did apply psychological safety, the inclusion and the learner stages, and ones that did not include those. I want to know what you felt like under both scenarios. I want to know what you feel like in a classroom where you can give feedback to your professor versus where you can't because they just can't accept that from you. I want to hear your ideas, further ideas on self-managing teams. I want us to just kind of have a nice chat, all of us together. So jot down some ideas, thoughts you've had, examples you've lived through or you can think of, and let's all compare our notes and see maybe we can learn something from one another Thursday that wouldn't even be in a textbook anywhere. Let's see if we can find the next nugget of knowledge for us. All right. Well, then you're free to roam about the country. I'm going to be here for a few minutes processing the video. Everybody online, as our class here departs out, I hope everybody heard what I had to say. If not, well, it will be in the video. Does anybody on Zoom have any comments they want to add or questions you have to ask or anything? You guys are good. Okay, I see a
No
chat.
questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Oh, you're welcome, everybody. Jacob, you're welcome. If no one has any questions or comments, then I will see you Wednesday on Zoom. One second, let me.
Thank you.
Hey, you take care. Thank you. I want, no, Zoom's driving me bonkers. Stop the share. And